Good morning, 6th grade. Today we're going to be talking about the different metals and non-metals. So we talked about metals last time, but we're just going to start there again. Just a brief overview of some of these metals here. It says, aside from copper and gold, all metal has a silvery color, which we'll get into later on. Mercury is the only metal that is liquid at room temperature. Electricity flows easily through most metals. Metals conduct heat well. More here, we talked about chromium, which is found on cars to give them a more reflective look and prevent rusting. Talked about zinc, which is mixed with steel to make it stronger. It's also used in certain batteries. And of course, a nickel has some nickel in it. And nickel is used to make stainless steel batteries and also the lining for tanks with dangerous chemicals. Now from there, we talked about lead, different parts about lead here. And we get into non-metals. And so, if you look at the bottom right over here, you can see the group of non-metals. Let me get my pointer real quick. And you can see all the things on the periodic table on this side are non-metals. And I have two examples of non-metals on here, ones that you guys will become familiar with by the end of the day. But we start here with this. Bromine is a liquid at room temperature and is the only liquid at room temperature non-metal. And so that's one thing to know. Bromine is the exception there. From there, non-metals are known to come in many colors. We talked about metals before. They have a silver metallic kind of look to them. And that's why when we call something metallic looking, it's shiny and it's silver. However, non-metals, they come in different colors. Sulfur is yellow. Bottom left there, that's sulfur. Carbon is black. In the middle, that is a piece of carbon right there. And you can see the cool colors of non-metals. From there, we also talk about hydrogen being a non-metal. Now, hydrogen is almost always seen as a gas, and it takes a lot of effort to actually get liquid hydrogen, or it's almost impossible to get solid hydrogen. Hydrogen is a non-metal that is extremely, extremely flammable, and this caused a lot of problems when they tried to fly a blimp filled with hydrogen. It only took one spark to make that whole thing blow up. That's called the Hindenburg. You might look into that a little later on. Then from there, now the air we breathe is made up of mostly non-metals. And I say mostly just to rule out the small amount of trace metals in the air caused by whatever. And we see here that 78% of the air is nitrogen and about 21% of it is oxygen. So when you breathe in air, believe it or not, you're breathing in a lot more nitrogen than you are oxygen. Strange to think about, but it is true. And it's something that you guys need to know. So make sure to write all these things down here. We're moving on to the next slide. Only 2 slides that are new today to take notes on. From there, we talk about some more non-metals. I have 3 at the bottom here. Nitrogen is used in rocket fuel, fertilizer, and explosives. And so that's a wide range of things that it's used for, but rocket fuel and explosives, those are kind of you can see those two, how they are linked. Fertilizer is a bit different, but plants need the nitrates, and nitrates come from nitrogen. Now, nitrogen is also found in proteins. That's a pretty big part of your proteins in general. And so, if you were to look up proteins, you would see that proteins actually help to make your muscles. And if you hear people at the gym, they'll often talk about getting a protein shake. Or maybe one of your parents, instead of eating a meal, has a protein shake instead. And a lot of that protein is actually nitrogen. At the bottom left, you can see a liquid being poured out with lots of gas around it. And that is liquid nitrogen used to cool a lot of things below freezing temperature. Really cool stuff. From there, talk about carbon. Now, we looked at carbon in the last slide. It was that black lump of coal, basically. And carbon is a basic building block for life. And that's a pretty big deal. All organic material has a large amount of carbon in it. Now, carbon is very interesting, too, because carbon can bond in a way that forms graphite. Now, graphite is another word for pencil lead. And so if you are writing right now with a pencil, that's carbon that is leaving the marks on your paper. Now, that same carbon, if arranged properly, is not graphite anymore. It's actually diamonds. Now, it's very extremely difficult to do this. It's not something that you can do on your own, but with enough time, pressure, and the right conditions being met, it's possible for carbon to turn into diamonds, and that's a really cool thing to think about. From there, we get into sulfur. Now, sulfur was on the last slide as well. It was that yellow chunk looking solid. Sulfur is a nasty smelling yellow colored solid. At room temperature, of course. You can actually heat it up and it gives off even more disgusting smell. And it's just not fun to be around. Sulfur is responsible for many of the disgusting smelling things we know. Brimstone in the Bible, based off of sulfur. Rotten eggs, they stink because they have sulfur in them. Skunk spray even has a bit of sulfur in it, making it absolutely disgusting. Now, the last non-metal we're going to talk about today is phosphorus. Now, phosphorus is a wax-like solid that can spontaneously burst into flames. Phosphorus comes in two flavors, basically. We have white phosphorus, which is not what I have here, and that white phosphorus is known for, if it's out in the air, randomly combusting. Not good. But red phosphorus, what is shown in the middle right there at the bottom, is actually more stable. And it's used on the end of matches, the part where you actually strike against the side of the box, that is phosphorus containing. And it's a really, really interesting thing to look at. Red phosphorus is much more useful to us than white phosphorus because we can control red phosphorus better and it doesn't just randomly burst into flames. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about today is actually not a non-metal. It is a semi-metal, and it is silicone. Now, silicone is a semi-metal and can be found in cookware and even sand. And so on the bottom right, you can see some silicone bakeware. And it's very common nowadays to find silicone for baking instead of other materials because silicone very easy to maneuver. It's not as rigid as your other stuff that you can use to make cookware. A lot of the spatulas that you use probably contain some silicone in them. You can see all those things down there. A lot of molds are made out of silicone because they're easier to get the pies and cakes out of. And ice trays, a lot of the time, are also made out of silicone as well. There's tons of uses for silicone. And the sand that we talk about that's on the beach is actually a mixture of silicone and oxygen. And that's just crazy to think about. Oxygen is a gas in the air, but yet when it mixes with silicone in the proper way, it actually changes into a really, really, really cool thing. It's no longer that silicone bakeware, it becomes sand. Alright guys, that is where we're going to end for today's lesson. Hope you guys have a wonderful day. Make sure to take notes and send them to me, and I will see you later. Goodbye.